The stars bled crimson over the shattered plains of Seraphon Prime, a dying moon lost in the vast cold reaches beyond HD 189733b. The air shimmered under storms of plasma and radiation, while the blackened husks of once mighty fortresses jutted from the landscape like broken bones. Firestorms churned across the horizon, licking at the broken towers with tongues of molten fury. Above, the heavens themselves seemed to scream. The atmosphere torn open by descending warships, their monstrous silhouettes blackening out the light of distant suns. These ships were like nothing natural, sleek abominations of metal and organic matter, their surfaces shifting like living skin beneath armor plate. From them poured legions of terror incarnate, the Tervani, the ancient apex predators of the stars. They were not creatures of flesh alone, but of cold design and brutal efficiency. Their bodies were a grotesque marriage of biology and machine, each warrior a masterpiece of evolution's darkest dreams. Silvered tendrils coiled from their backs, interfacing with weapons grown into their very bones. Their eyes, once organic, had long since been replaced by glowing lenses capable of tracking prey through walls, through storms, even through the folds of subspace itself. They moved not as individuals, but as a single, fluid swarm. Every step calculated, every strike merciless, every movement an echo of millions of years spent perfecting the art of domination. On the surface, the last defenders of Seraphon Prime, the Grelvax, fought a battle already lost. Their plasma rifles flickered weakly against the Tervani armor. Their fortifications crumbled under the relentless bombardments that fell from orbit like the fists of angry gods. The Grelvax were ancient too, a proud reptilian race that once ruled empires spanning dozens of stars. But age had made them complacent. Comfort had dulled their instincts. And now, in their twilight, they found themselves nothing more than sport for the galaxy's apex hunters. Screams echoed through the burning canyons, and the scent of scorched flesh filled the air. A grim symphony of extinction playing out under the blood-red sky. For eons, this had been the pattern written into the very bones of galactic history. The Tervani had risen in the shadows of collapsing civilizations, seizing the mantle of predators not by choice, but by inevitability. Evolution did not favor the kind, nor the wise. It favored the ruthless. Species after species, no matter how sophisticated, had crumbled before their merciless tide. The galaxy's archives were thick with the remnants of those who had dared to resist. The brilliant but naive Sheltov Confederacy had fallen within a century. The Varketh, masters of gravitational weaponry, had their homeworlds torn apart and cast into the void. Even the Omnari, whose fleets once blotted out entire sectors with their numbers, found their sun systems picked clean, their bones left to bleach under dying stars. It became an accepted truth, whispered across dying embers. Of once mighty worlds, in the end the predators always win. There was no fighting it, no bargaining, no hope. Imagine what it would be like to live in that universe. Imagine knowing that no matter how much you built, no matter how brilliantly you innovated, one day the sky would split open, and something would come for you. Not to conquer, not to enslave, but simply because that was the order of things. Where resistance was seen not as bravery, but as foolishness. Where the last, desperate broadcasts of crumbling civilizations spoke not of hope, but of acceptance. And yet, even among the ashes of countless failures, there were those who dreamed. Those who wondered if the cycle could be broken, if something, someone, could rise to shatter the Predator's dominion once and for all. And somewhere, beyond the well-mapped stars, something stirred. Before we jump into this epic tale, subscribe to HFY Chronicles for the most intense sci-fi battles, legendary warriors, and universe-shaking wars. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join the fight. The first ripple of change was so small, so insignificant, that it was nearly missed. A curious anomaly detected near the Orion Arm, an unexpected resistance to a minor Tervani. Reconnaissance sweep. It was nothing remarkable on the surface. Some new colony world, barely a few generations old, insignificant to the great galactic powers. The Tervani dispatched a single hunter frigate. Standard procedure, certain that a light show and a few terror strikes would bring the inhabitants to heel. But when the frigate arrived, it found something wrong. The human colony was not huddled, in fear. They were not awaiting judgment with lowered heads. Instead, they had fortified themselves with grim, ingenious precision. Shield generators cobbled together from mining equipment, railgun batteries constructed from salvaged shipwrecks, drone swarms guided by rudimentary but brutally effective AI. And when the Tervani descended, expecting the usual easy slaughter, they were met with a storm of violence so fierce, so unrelenting, that the frigate never even pierced the outer defenses. It died screaming into the void, its last transmissions garbled by a jamming field the humans had designed not just to block communications, but to drive enemy cybernetics into lethal self-destruction. 2 more frigates followed, dispatched, with heavier armaments, and both were torn apart before they could even establish a beachhead. The third managed to escape, but not unscathed, scarred, shattered, and broadcasting frantic warnings back to the Tervani command nexus. Humanity, it seemed, was something different. At first, the Tervani Council was amused. Flukes happened. Even prey occasionally lashed out when cornered, but deep beneath their scorn, unease began to slither. Prey was not supposed to fight like this. They were not supposed to adapt so quickly, to retaliate with such disproportionate violence. Most prey species invested in walls, diplomacy, in desperate peace offerings. Humanity had invested in weapons. The reports grew darker. New colonies popping up like infections across dead worlds. Terraforming stations deployed on planets others had abandoned as lost causes. Human settlements flourishing under conditions that would have killed even hardened galactic veterans. It was not just stubbornness. It was something deeper, something ancient in their blood. The refusal to accept a universe where only the predators could thrive. Still, the Tervani chose arrogance. They prepared a standard eradication response, an expeditionary fleet of overwhelming force. Hundreds of battleships, dreadnoughts, annihilation carriers, and atmospheric razors, all aimed at wiping humanity from the stars before they could become a real threat. It had worked 1,000 times before. Against the Varkath, against the Omnari, against the proud Sheltov who once declared themselves masters of the sector. But there was something the Tervani had failed to account for. Something no other species had dared to imagine. Far beyond the gaze of the Council, in the steel labyrinths orbiting Earth, the humans had built something monstrous, born not from conquest, but from the primal instinct to survive at any cost. They had forged an armada unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Not graceful, not majestic. Their ships were jagged, brutal, stitched together from the remains of Earth's last wars and the technological corpses of fallen alien civilizations, shielded by layers of reactive armor, bristling with weaponry both primitive and revolutionary. They were not designed to inspire awe. They were designed to end wars before they could begin. The humans didn't name their fleet with pride. They named it with prophecy, Revenant Armada. The fleet of the dead returned to claim vengeance. Every hull bore the same warning, etched deep into the metal where even plasma could not burn it away. Fear the prey that fights back. When the Tervani fleet set course for Earth's colonies, they did so with the confidence of a force of nature. The galaxy watched with resigned sorrow. Another footnote. Another empire erased before it ever had a chance to rise. They could not have been more wrong. Because this time, the prey had teeth. The Revenant Armada emerged from the darkness like a nightmare made flesh. The first glimpse the galaxy had of the human threat wasn't in grand displays of firepower or ships emerging from the depths of unknown space. It was in the eerie silence that preceded them, like the pause before the final chord of a symphony, a chilling stillness that hung heavy in the cosmic void. The Tervani fleet, already on its way to eradicate the human colonies, had no idea that their destiny was about to shift in ways they could never comprehend. The Tervani battlecruisers, with their shimmering hulls and sleek forms designed for efficiency, had once been the pinnacle of warship design. Their weapons were capable of annihilating entire cities with a single strike, and their shields could withstand the devastating energies of a collapsing star. They ruled the stars, and every species knew it. Yet, despite their overwhelming technological superiority, they underestimated the ingenuity of the human mind. The Revenant Armada was not just a fleet, it was an idea made manifest. Each ship within it was a living testament to humanity's will to survive, forged from their darkest hours, each scar and mark on their hulls telling a story of loss, perseverance, and rebellion. The ships were patched together with a mishmash of technology, alien and human, that shouldn't have worked, but it did. Their hulls were an amalgamation of every piece of wreckage that could be scavenged from battlefields and derelict ships, alike, reinforced with materials scavenged from dead worlds and experimental alloys scavenged from distant alien ruins. They were patchwork, yes, but they were deadly. They were built for a single purpose: to strike fear into the hearts of any who dared to consider humanity weak. As the Tervani fleet neared their target, the Revenant Armada silently moved into position. The humans had learned long ago to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Stealth, once considered a secondary tactic in the age of overwhelming firepower, was now the first weapon in their arsenal. And so, the Armada slid into the shadow of a dead star, where even the most sophisticated Tervani sensors couldn't detect their approach. The galaxy's most advanced detection systems scanned the empty space, failing to register the Armada's presence. No blips, no readings, just the cold, dark void. Inside the heart of one of the human warships, Captain Elena Drake stood at the helm of the Avenger, the flagship of the Revenant Armada. She was a woman whose face bore the harsh lines of a life spent fighting for survival. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked over the tactical display, her hand resting lightly on the control panel, fingers hovering over the launch sequence for the fleet's next move. She had been with the Armada since its first mission, since its inception, and in that time, she had watched humanity's ragtag forces become a force to be reckoned with. The ships were her family, the soldiers, her children. She would give her life to protect them, but it was the lives of the Tervani that she now sought to take. "Captain," a voice crackled through the comms, pulling her from her reverie. "All ships are in position. We're ready to move on your command." Drake's fingers curled into a fist. The time had come. The Tervani were approaching the outer rim of the human colonies, and humanity's long-awaited retribution was about to begin. "Commence Operation Reclamation," she ordered, her voice low but filled with an undeniable edge of finality. The ships of the Armada rumbled to life, their engines igniting with a soft hum that quickly grew louder as the fleet began to accelerate. The silence that had dominated the void for so long was shattered, replaced by the sound of engines roaring to life, and the sudden clarity of a violent intent. It was not a subtle move. It was not a diplomatic plea. It was war, and humanity had not come here to beg for mercy. Drake's fingers danced over the control panel, and as she issued the order to engage, a fleet of warships, previously hidden in the shadows, emerged from their cloaked positions. The Tervani ships, so sure of their supremacy, were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of an entire fleet that should not have been there. The first Tervani ship to catch sight of the approaching Armada didn't have time to process the incoming threat before it was vaporized in a flash of blinding energy. The Revenant Armada's weapons were unlike anything the Tervani had ever encountered. In their arrogance, the Predators had assumed that humanity's reliance on outdated technology would leave them vulnerable. They had never anticipated the brutality of the humans' innovations. While their weapons lacked the clean elegance of Tervani firepower, they were devastating in their own right. Designed not for efficiency, but for destruction. Railguns loaded with enormous slugs of dense metal pounded into enemy shields, bending the very fabric of space around them with each impact. Plasma beams designed to melt entire fleets lashed out with terrifying accuracy, piercing Tervani armor with an almost surgical precision. But it wasn't just the weapons that caught the Tervani by surprise. It was the tactics. While the Tervani had always relied on overwhelming force, the humans used their greatest weapon, their minds. They didn't fight by the rules of engagement the Tervani were accustomed to. They didn't play the game of war. Instead, they bent it to their will. The Revenant Armada's ships didn't attack as a unified whole. Instead, they moved in small, calculated groups, flanking, harrying, and drawing out the Tervani forces. The Tervani couldn't fight this. They couldn't predict it. Every move they made seemed to fall right into humanity's hands, each fleet formation broken apart by sudden, ferocious flanking attacks. The Tervani could not understand why their own ships were being torn apart by an enemy that, by all rights, should have been easy prey. "Commander! We've lost the front line!" A Tervani officer screamed, her voice cracking with panic as the battle unfolded. The panic spread quickly through the ranks. Tervani ships, typically known for their stoic precision, now found themselves in chaos. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to fight back with a rage born from the deepest instincts of survival. But what truly terrified the Tervani wasn't just the skill of the humans. It was the fact that they fought with something that no predator had ever truly encountered before. Hope. The idea of hope was foreign to the Tervani. They were hunters, born and bred to wipe out all that stood in their way. Hope was something only prey could afford to entertain. But here, for the first time in millennia, the Tervani were facing something they could not devour. They were facing the last remnant of a species driven by an unbreakable will to live. And it was that will, raw, unyielding, and terrifying, that drove the Revenant Armada forward, carving its path through the darkness of the galaxy. By the time the Tervani had fully realized their mistake, it was too late. The Revenant Armada, with its relentless drive, had already dealt the first blows in a war that would define the future of the galaxy. And the Tervani, once the feared apex predators of the stars, were now faced with a new reality. They were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. The battle raged on, the vastness of space filled with the flashing chaos of energy beams and shuddering explosions. The Tervani fleet, once so sure of their superiority, had now been plunged into a panic-fueled disarray. Their ships, each once a testament to the might of their civilization, now looked fragile and vulnerable against the relentless assault of the Revenant Armada. It was as if they were prey, cornered in a predator's den, and the realization of their vulnerability was beginning to set in. For Captain Elena Drake, standing on the bridge of the Avenger, every second felt like an eternity. Her heart raced as she watched the tactical display, tracking the movements of the Tervani ships. Each one was like a piece on a chessboard, shifting, reacting, desperate to avoid the coming doom. She could see their attempts to regroup, their formation crumbling under the precision of the human fleet. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the Tervani were not giving up easily. They were formidable opponents, after all. Their ships might have been falling apart under fire, but their crew was resolute, trained in the art of survival. "Status report," Drake barked, her voice steady but sharp, her eyes never leaving the screen. "We're taking some damage, Captain," replied her tactical officer, his voice a little too calm for Drake's liking. "Hull integrity is holding, but we've lost a few external systems. Shields are down to 70%. Drake nodded grimly. She had known it wouldn't be easy. These weren't just Tervani ships. They were a reflection of an entire civilization that prided itself on dominance. The Tervani were relentless. But so were the humans. And unlike the Tervani, the Revenant Armada had no choice but to push forward. Their survival depended on it. "Keep pushing forward," Drake ordered. "We end this today." The Avenger lurched forward as the captain issued her command. The moment of reckoning had arrived. She had studied the Tervani tactics extensively, and she knew that, despite their technological prowess, their greatest weakness lay in their overconfidence. The Tervani, for all their superiority in weaponry and shields, were not used to being hunted. They had never been forced to react to an enemy with the sheer unpredictability and savagery of humanity. Across the battlefield, human ships moved with terrifying precision. The Revenant Armada's tactics had evolved over decades of conflict, and now, in the face of this cosmic war, their strategy was set in motion. They did not just strike, they adapted. They used guerrilla warfare in the void of space. They struck from every angle, retreating when necessary, only to strike again when least expected. The Tervani fleet, composed of ships designed for straightforward battles, could not keep up. The human warships did not fight in predictable patterns. Their attacks were sudden, aggressive, and utterly without mercy. In the black void of space, their movements were erratic and chaotic, like wild animals cornering their prey. But the true genius of the human attack was in their weapons, savage, brutal, and built for destruction. While Tervani weapons were sleek and efficient, designed for clean kills and precision, human weaponry was different. It was built to tear things apart. Railguns mounted on the sides of each warship fired massive projectiles that tore through Tervani shields like paper. Plasma bursts surged out from cannons, erupting in violent bursts of light that consumed whole ships in seconds. Every strike, every shot was meant to hurt, to maim, to destroy. It wasn't about elegance, it was about obliteration. The Avenger was a prime example of this philosophy. Its hull, a patchwork of metal scavenged from ancient ruins, was emblazoned with scars from previous battles. But what it lacked in elegance, it more than made up for in sheer power. The ship was a beast, a living testament to humanity's grit. Elena Drake stood at the helm, her hands steady, guiding the ship through the swirling chaos of the battlefield. She knew every ship in her fleet, every maneuver they could make, and she knew that now, more than ever, they had to keep up the pressure. Suddenly, an alarm blared throughout the bridge. A massive Tervani dreadnought, one of the largest and most advanced warships in their fleet, emerged from the shadows, its cannons charging with terrifying power. The dreadnought's guns had the potential to decimate entire human fleets in a single shot. It was a beast of war, a weapon that could erase entire colonies with the flick of a switch. But Elena Drake wasn't worried. She knew the Tervani's most powerful weapon wasn't just their firepower. It was their belief in their own invincibility. The dreadnought would come for her, and when it did, she would make sure it regretted ever leaving the Tervani homeworld. All ships, prepare to engage the dreadnought, Drake ordered, her voice sharp, clear. Focus everything we've got on its engines. We cripple that ship. We cripple their fleet. The Avenger surged forward, engines roaring to life as it plunged into the heart of the chaos. Behind it, the rest of the armada followed, their weapons charging with a deadly fury. The Tervani dreadnought fired first, a massive beam of concentrated plasma cutting through the void, slamming into the human lines. But the humans were ready. They scattered, each ship maneuvering with a terrifying unpredictability, dodging the plasma burst with precision. And then, they struck. The Avenger unleashed a barrage of missiles, which tore into the dreadnought's shields. The massive ship recoiled under the assault, but its shields held firm. Undeterred, the Revenant fleet closed in, each ship firing its railguns and plasma beams with unrelenting fury. The dreadnought retaliated, its guns spewing death in every direction. But with each strike, its shields began to weaken. The Revenant armada knew that they had to exploit every crack in its defenses. In the heart of the battle, Elena's mind raced. She could see the fear in the eyes of her crew, but she could also see something else, the same fire that burned within her. They were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting to prove that humanity's place in the galaxy was earned, not given. It was a fight for legacy, for freedom, for everything humanity had sacrificed to survive. And in that moment, she understood. This wasn't just another battle. This was the turning point. This was where humanity proved that they would never be the hunted again. The dreadnought's shields finally failed under the relentless barrage, and in that moment of weakness, the Avenger fired its final, most devastating weapon, a fusion missile capable of tearing through even the most formidable of ships. The missile shot forward with terrifying speed, slamming into the dreadnought's core, causing a cataclysmic explosion that shattered the Tervani flagship into 1,000 burning fragments. A cheer erupted across the Revenant armada as the dreadnought was consumed by the inferno. The Tervani fleet, disoriented and demoralized, began to fall apart. The Revenant armada had broken the heart of their enemy, and now the galaxy was watching. The humans had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The aftermath of the battle was a quiet one, strangely so for a conflict of such magnitude. In the wake of the destruction, the silence of space seemed almost unnatural, as if the cosmos itself was holding its breath. The Revenant armada had emerged victorious, but the cost of the battle was written in the blackened hulls of wrecked ships and the shattered remains of their enemies. As the Avenger drifted through the debris field, Elena Drake stood at the bridge, staring out into the cold void. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. "Captain," came a voice from the tactical officer, breaking the eerie quiet. "We've intercepted a communication from the Tervani command. It's a distress signal, but it's garbled. It seems they're calling for reinforcements." Drake's eyes narrowed. The Tervani might have lost the battle, but they weren't finished. Their pride was too great to let this defeat go unanswered. The message was a clear sign that they would return, and they would return stronger. Humanity had just made its mark, but now it had painted a target on its back. "Prepare the fleet for any further engagement," Drake ordered, her voice calm but resolute. "We may not have seen the last of them." As the Avenger moved deeper into the Tervani-controlled sector, the crew knew what awaited them. The Tervani would not forgive this humiliation. They would come back with a vengeance. But what made this moment more uncertain than any other was the knowledge that the Tervani weren't alone. There were other factions in the galaxy. Other predators that had been watching, waiting. The Tervani had long held their place at the top of the food chain. Now, however, that position was threatened. And when the predators smelled blood, they came out of hiding. Drake paced the bridge, her mind racing. She couldn't help but think of the ancient stories of Earth, of mankind's place in the natural world. Humanity had once been a fragile species, battling the elements for survival on a small, lonely planet. But over the centuries, they had evolved, adapting to the world around them, learning to use their environment, their technology, and their ingenuity to become something far greater. Now, in the vast expanse of space, humanity had become a force to be reckoned with, a predator in its own right. The first signs of the galaxy's broader reaction came only days later, when a new fleet appeared on the scanners. The ships were massive, larger than any of the Tervani warships, and their design was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The ships were sleek, black, and seemingly alive, their surfaces rippling with energy. The vessels were of the Dracarian Empire, a race of ancient reptilian beings who had long ruled a portion of the galaxy with iron claws. They had watched the Tervani and their empire for eons, studying their tactics, their strengths, and their weaknesses. But they had never intervened, always content to allow the Tervani to maintain dominance, until now. The Dracarians were not pleased by the turn of events. The defeat of the Tervani had created an opening, and the Dracarians were quick to exploit it. They had no intention of allowing a new power, humanity, to rise. They would destroy the Revenant Armada before it could become a true threat, and with their superior fleet and devastating technology, they believed they would easily crush this human upstart. But they underestimated humanity's greatest strength, its unpredictability. The Revenant Armada had fought not just with superior technology, but with an understanding of their enemies that had come from years of surviving against impossible odds. The Dracarians, with their arrogance and centuries of dominance, did not know what they were up against. As the Dracarian fleet entered human-controlled space, their warship seemed almost alive, their dark hulls shifting as though breathing. Their technology was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The Dracarians were masters of bioengineering, and their ships were an extension of their will, hive-like structures that functioned as living, breathing war machines. These ships could regenerate, repair themselves, and adapt to nearly any threat. They were deadly, and they were relentless. But Elena Drake wasn't fazed. She had faced the Tervani, and she had led her fleet to victory. The Dracarians might be more advanced, but humanity had something they lacked: the will to survive, to adapt, to innovate in the face of destruction. Drake knew that the coming battle would be a test of everything humanity had learned since leaving Earth. They would need to outthink the Dracarians, outmaneuver them, and strike when least expected. The Dracarian ships moved in perfect formation, each one a weapon of unimaginable power. But there was something about their methodical approach that bothered Elena. They were too confident, too precise. It was as though they had already written humanity off as nothing more than an obstacle to be crushed beneath their boots. But Elena could feel the change in the air. The Revenant Armada was no longer a ragtag group of survivors. It had become something far more dangerous. A team of warriors, bonded by the fires of war, willing to do whatever it took to survive. "Captain," came the voice of her intelligence officer, breaking through her thoughts. "We've intercepted their communications. They're planning to launch an all-out assault on our fleet. We have less than an hour before they engage." Elena's eyes hardened. The time for hesitation was over. The time for fighting to survive was done. This was no longer just a battle for existence. This was a fight for dominance. And she wasn't about to let the Dracarians, or anyone, decide humanity's fate. "Prepare all ships for engagement," she said, her voice steady but full of fire. "We're not just fighting to survive. We're fighting to prove that humanity belongs here, that we will not be ruled by anyone." The ship's crew began to scramble, the sounds of hurried movement and orders filling the air. Elena stood, tall, watching the Dracarian fleet on the screen as they closed in. The galaxy would soon know that humanity was no longer prey. They were predators in their own right, and no one would ever forget that. The tension in the bridge was palpable as Elena Drake stood at the command center, watching the Dracarian fleet draw closer. The final moments before battle were always the hardest, when the weight of decisions, the lives of her crew, and the fate of humanity rested in her hands. The cold, calculating menace of the Dracarians, with their hive-like ships and impenetrable arrogance, loomed large on the viewscreen. The situation was critical. The Revenant Armada had faced down impossible odds before, but this was a different kind of fight, one that could decide whether humanity would remain an insignificant footnote in galactic history or claim its rightful place among the stars. "Captain, the Dracarian fleet has entered weapons range," the tactical officer called out, his voice steady but tinged with the tension shared by everyone in the room. "They're preparing to fire." Elena's mind raced. The Dracarian warships were notorious for their devastating bioenergy weapons, lasers that could cut through steel as though it were paper, weapons that could obliterate entire fleets in the blink of an eye. These ships were alive, an extension of the Dracarian will, and they fought with a single-minded purpose. Unlike the Tervani, who relied on brute force and advanced technology, the Dracarians fought with a cruel, predatory precision, using their ships as an extension of their very being. But Elena had learned something crucial from the Tervani. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about adaptability, strategy, and timing. She had seen what humanity could do when it pushed itself beyond its limits. The Revenant Armada was more than just a fleet. It was a symbol of humanity's indomitable spirit. She knew that in this moment, victory would not be decided by strength alone, but by their ability to outthink their enemies. "Prepare to initiate the new strategy," Elena commanded, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. The crew quickly began inputting commands, readying the fleet for the unconventional tactics that had been developed in the wake of the Tervani battle. It was a risk. There was no guarantee it would work. But at this point, they had no choice. It was the only way to level the playing field against the Dracarians' overwhelming firepower. The first salvo came without warning, a barrage of energy beams, each one cutting through space with deadly accuracy. The Revenant Armada moved quickly, dodging and weaving through the oncoming fire, the ships dancing in perfect formation. The Dracarians, expecting to crush the human fleet with sheer force, were unprepared for the speed and unpredictability with which the Avenger and its allies moved. Humanity's ships, though technologically inferior, had been modified for one key advantage: agility. The sleek, angular designs of the Revenant vessels made them fast, nimble, and unpredictable. Every ship in the fleet was equipped with advanced cloaking systems that, while not perfect, allowed them to become ghost-like shadows on the battlefield. The Dracarians fired again, but this time they missed, just by a fraction. But that fraction was enough. "Target their weak points," Elena shouted, her eyes never leaving the viewscreen. "Focus fire on their propulsion systems and energy cores. We need to cripple them before they get too close." The battle raged on, each side striking and countering with ruthless efficiency. The Avenger and its fleet targeted the Dracarian warship's engines, taking advantage of their immense size and slower reaction times. The Dracarians, accustomed to dominance, were caught off guard by the human fleet's unrelenting, fast-moving tactics. Ships that had once been impervious to anything but the most devastating of weapons now found themselves crippled by precise hits to their energy cores. The Avenger herself fired a devastating salvo, the kinetic energy projectile slamming into the Dracarian flagship with a resounding impact. The flagship's shields flared, but the barrage was too much. For the first time, the Dracarians seemed to falter. Their once impenetrable defense had been broken. Elena could feel the shift in momentum, a fleeting but vital victory. But the Dracarians weren't finished. In retaliation, the Dracarian flagship launched its final gambit, an energy pulse that could disrupt all electronic systems in its path. It was a desperate move, but one that could cripple the entire human fleet. As the pulse shot through space, Elena's heart skipped a beat. The pulse would hit them in mere seconds. "Brace for impact," Elena shouted. A deafening roar filled the bridge as the pulse collided with the Avengers' shields. For a moment, everything went black. The ship's systems went haywire, and the crew was thrown into chaos. The lights flickered, and alarms blared. Elena's voice was the only thing holding the crew together. "Stay focused," she barked, her voice cutting through the panic. "Bring systems back online. We're not done yet." With a single-minded determination, the crew worked tirelessly, rerouting power, bypassing damaged systems, and restoring the Avengers' ability to fight. The energy pulse had caused massive disruption, but it hadn't been enough to defeat humanity. If anything, it had ignited a new fire in them, a fire that burned hotter than the Drakarians could ever have anticipated. The Avengers' engines roared back to life, and with it, humanity's fight was far from over. Elena Drake stood tall, staring out into the heart of the battle. The Revenant Armada had fought back the predators of the galaxy before, and they would do it again. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. This was about proving that humanity, once written off as prey, was now a force to be reckoned with. The Drakarians, battered and broken, began to retreat, their once pristine fleet in disarray. The galaxy would remember this day. They would remember the battle that turned the tide, a battle that showed that no matter how powerful the predators of the galaxy were, they could no longer claim dominion over humanity. Elena Drake stood as the battle ended, her mind already turning to the future. The war against the galaxy's predators was far from over, but humanity had made its mark. The Revenant Armada had shown the galaxy that it would not be bullied, not by the Tervani, not by the Drakarians, and not by anyone. The predators of the galaxy had underestimated humanity. They had thought that Earth's children were weak, that they were prey. But humanity had proven them wrong. They had shown the universe that they were more than just survivors. They were hunters, and the galaxy would tremble at their name.